A girl from a small American town was left at home alone and disappeared without a trace. The police immediately began searching for her. Looking into the girl's computer, they discovered the first clue that led them to the shocking truth. Further events shocked the public, since no one had ever encountered such horror before. Casey Woody gave birth on October 17, 1989 in the small American town of Holland, Arkansas. She had 2 older brothers and loving parents. But when the girl was 7, misfortune overtook their family. In 1997, she and her parents went to pick up her brother from a painless game. On the way back, they had an accident, as a result of which her mother died. For their entire family, this tragedy became a great challenge. Casey's father continued to raise his children alone. In addition, he worked as a police officer and had to spend a lot of time on duty. In this regard, the girl became very independent from an early age. She cooked her own meals, did her own laundry, and did all the cleaning on her own initiative. Casey tried to help her father and brothers, despite the fact that she was the youngest. On December 3, 2002, when Casey was 13 years old, she was left home alone for the evening. Her father worked, her brother Tim stayed in the college library, and her second brother had already moved to another city by that time. Tim's friend, who was attending a training course, also lived with them temporarily, but he was also not at home that evening. Casey's maternal aunt, who lived next door, was also absent. As a result, the girl had to spend the entire evening alone. This was a common thing for her. Before leaving school, she asked 2 of her friends if she could spend the night with them, but their parents did not allow it. Casey's house was located on the outskirts of the city and was almost completely surrounded by trees. Because of this, he was hidden from prying eyes and neighbors. The brother's friend returned at about 10:15 p.m., and the house was silent. He thought that the girl was already sleeping in her room and went about his business. At 11:40, Tim came home. He decided to check on his sister, looked into her bedroom, but the girl was not there. Considering that it was almost midnight, the young man immediately contacted his father. Despite the fact that Casey was very independent, she was only 13 years old and could not go anywhere at such a late time. The father immediately arrived home, where he noticed several disturbing things. Casey's glasses were broken and her computer was on, and their dog was limping, as if it had received some kind of injury. Without thinking twice, the father contacted his colleagues and reported his daughter missing. After that, he began calling all her friends and their parents, hoping that the girl simply went to one of them. However, no one saw Casey after school. The men also noticed that all his daughter's jackets, warm clothes, and even her shoes were left at home. Considering that it was a December night outside, she clearly couldn't go anywhere. The police immediately began searching, and very soon they received their first clue. On the girl's computer, an online chat was open with her friend named Scott. The brother looked into the correspondence and saw that his sister sent him the last message at 21:41, after which she did not contact him. At the same time, Scott continued to write to her. Having received no response, he began to worry, and wrote to Casey's friend, after which he tried to call the girl's home phone. But there was no answer either. Tim wrote to him in the hope that the boy could shed light on Casey's disappearance, but he had no idea where she had gone. The only thing he knew was that during the correspondence with him, the girl was also talking on the phone with another friend named Dave. However, she stopped responding to the message a little earlier than 9:41 a.m. She disappeared for a few minutes, and when Scott started texting if everything was okay, she simply replied yes and disappeared again. The FBI quickly became involved in the case of Casey's disappearance. Agents spoke with her family and friends, who shared the same concerns. According to them, the girl spent a lot of time in online chats, communicating there with various people whom she had never seen in person. She mainly corresponded with 2 guys, 14-year-old Scott from Georgia and 17-year-old Dave from California. She met them many months before her disappearance in a Christian chat room for teenagers. She first started communicating with Dave, and they quickly found a common language. The guy said that he has an aunt living in Arkansas who is in a coma after a car accident, and doctors see no chance of her recovery. Casey was reminded of her mother's death. She hardly talked to anyone about this topic, but Dave understood her and could listen. A few months after they met, they began to talk on the phone regularly, and Casey ended up talking to him literally every day. In general, the girl's father was not against the fact that his daughter communicated with someone on the internet, but her friends were very wary about this. In this online chat, there was no way to make sure that you were communicating with exactly who the interlocutor said he was. Dave only sent Casey a photo of himself once, but her friends continued to be wary of it. A few months later, Casey met 14-year-olds caught in the same chat room, and they started talking. Soon sympathy arose between them. Casey also had some feelings for Dave, but still chose Scott. The problem was that Dave was already 18 at that time, and the girls were only 13. When her father found out about the age of this young man, he told his daughter that Dave was too old for her and forbade her to communicate with him. However, Casey did not listen to him, because she believed that her father was making a big deal out of nothing. For her, Dave was an ordinary friend with whom she could talk and discuss pressing problems. On the day the girl disappeared, her friend saw a photo of Scott in Casey's school locker, and it greatly alarmed her. Casey said her boyfriend emailed her the photo, and her friend started arguing with her. She said it was extremely reckless to give her home address to people she had never met in person, and that it could be dangerous. But Casey wasn't worried about it at all. However, her friend's fears did not arise out of nowhere. A few months earlier, Casey's friend Jessica stayed at her house. In the evening, the girls were alone in the house. They called Dave, and all three of them talked on speakerphone. Suddenly, the girls heard someone walking near the house. It was pitch black outside, so Casey and Jessica couldn't see through the window. However, they both clearly heard leaves and twigs cracking under someone's feet. The girls hid in Casey's room, and soon they heard creaking coming from the kitchen. There was one board that creaked every time a person stepped on it. Therefore, Casey was confident that someone was in her kitchen. The friends tried to quietly barricade the door, and Casey whispered to Dave that there was someone in her house. The guy thought that they were imagining everything and were just making it up. And soon the noise really stopped. Since then, Casey's friends have been extremely suspicious of her online companions, especially after she gave Scott her home address. They didn't rule out the possibility that Scott might not actually be the 14-year-old boy he claims to be, but an adult criminal who could harm her. After Casey's disappearance, her friends told investigators about their suspicions about Scott, and that he knew the girl's home address. FBI agents ran through the email address from which the guy entered the chat, and then found his home address in Georgia. Local police immediately went there to check who Scott really was. It turned out that the guy was not lying. He really was 14 years old, and he physically could not have anything to do with Casey's disappearance, since there was almost 1,000 kilometers between them. The teenager's parents confirmed that he was at home with them that evening, and Scott was crossed off the list of suspects. After that, the detectives turned their attention to Dave. They again contacted Casey's friends, who remembered something else. Shortly before the incident, Dave said that his condition had deteriorated sharply, and he was going to Arkansas to say goodbye to her. The friends also added that Dave seemed strange to them. They spoke to him on the phone several times, and it seemed to them that his voice sounded older than his stated age. However, the girls were only 13, and the 18-year-old guy seemed like a man to them, so they didn't attach much importance to it. In addition, Dave sometimes uttered words and phrases that modern teenagers no longer used, and were more likely to hear such things from their parents. Experts tried to track him through his email address, but this time they were unsuccessful. Then they decided to do it the old-fashioned way. Holland was a small town, and at that time hundreds of people were already searching her. They tried to find the girl, but now investigators have added a new task to the police. The officers had to go to every hotel in the area looking for Dave, or whoever was hiding under that name. Detectives had very little information about this man. He introduced himself to Casey as Dave Fagan and said that he lived in San Diego. For this reason, investigators decided to look for any matches, no matter how insignificant. Early in the morning, police began to visit all hotels, both in Holland itself and in nearby settlements. Half an hour later, one of them spotted a car with California license plates in the nearby town of Convoy. He spoke to a hotel employee who said the car belonged to 47-year-old David Fuller, who checked in the day before Casey disappeared. Immediately after his arrival, Fuller stated that he did not need room service and demanded that he not visit him for the entire week. He also threw a fit when he discovered he couldn't connect his laptop to the internet and complained that he would have to go to the local library. The police decided to search his room, where a strange sight awaited them. The men's suitcases were on the floor, and the bed was made. On the suitcases lay a camouflage suit, and on it was a pair of rubber gloves. His laptop was also found in the room. The detectives asked a logical question. If Fuller did not spend the night in his bed, and did not appear in the room after arrival, where he slept all these 2 days, given that his car was parked in the hotel parking lot, they decided to check out car rental services. Within a few minutes they arrived at the nearest such company, whose employees confirmed that Fuller had rented a minivan from them. At the same time, the man behaved strangely. He was noticeably nervous and constantly went out to smoke while filling out the contract. Detectives received 2 important tips from company employees: Fuller's phone numbers and credit cards. And here they came to a disappointing conclusion. Fuller's phone number matched the one that regularly received calls to Casey's house. Having compared their times, the police were convinced that 47-year-old Fuller had been hiding behind the identity of 18-year-old Dave all this time. After checking his credit card transaction history, they learned that the men also rented a storage unit on the other side of town. A local officer and 2 FBI agents were immediately dispatched there. They were almost sure that Fuller and Casey were there, but they had no idea whether the girl was alive. They arrived at the warehouse at about 6 a.m. Having found the required cell, the officers saw that it was not locked and lifted the door. The same van stood inside. His engine was started. The FBI agents approached him cautiously. The very next second a shot sounded. Officers ran out of the room and called for backup. They were afraid to return fire because Casey might be inside the car. If the girl was alive, any wrong action on their part could lead to her death. After 2.5 hours, special forces arrived at the scene and headed inside the storage facility. Behind the van they saw Fuller's body. There was a gun clutched in his hand, and blood was coming from his head. Officers immediately realized he had committed suicide as soon as FBI agents opened the vault door. They found Casey's body in the van itself. She was lying face down on the floor. Her arms and legs were chained. Medical experts later determined that she had died from a gunshot wound hours before Fuller and had also been assaulted. A chloroform bottle and a rag were found next to her. Based on all this, the investigators built a probable picture of what happened. Apparently, Fuller snuck into Casey's house and used the chemical to put her to sleep. Then he carried the girl into his van and drove to the warehouse, where he raped and killed her. The news of Casey's murder shocked the entire city, which had not encountered such cruelty for a long time. However, that was not all, and soon the public learned even more alarming facts. Investigators continued to work on the case and learned that Fuller had come to the attention of the police on several occasions. He had a wife and 2 children, but in recent years his behavior has changed a lot. He distanced himself from his relatives and began to behave aggressively. His wife worried that he might harm her or the children, so she filed for divorce in 2002. The woman later said that Fuller could sit at the computer for hours, communicating with someone on the internet. ignoring what was happening around him. He also began regularly going for evening walks, during which he talked to someone on the phone. A man was once arrested for exposing himself to 2 girls. However, he did not suffer any serious punishment. Fuller's wife also once accused him of showering with their daughter, who was 7. The guardianship authorities conducted an investigation, but could not find evidence of this. After his wife left him, Fuller moved into a rented apartment in Low Mesa, California. Officers searched the property, finding a collage of Casey's photograph along with pieces of paper with her address and the addresses of her friends. After examining his computer, experts found that he communicated on the internet with 3 more girls, but all of them were not harmed by his actions. After studying Fuller's actions, police learned that he had visited Holland twice before Casey's murder. The first time he came there was in October. Detectives assumed that the man was watching the girl, studying her daily routine for his further plans for the abduction. The second time he came in November. Apparently, it was then that he planned to commit this crime, but something did not go according to plan, and the detectives remembered the story of Casey's friend when the girls thought that someone had sneaked into their house. Officers concluded that it was Fuller. He may have planned to kidnap Casey, but it was that evening that she called her friend over, and the man returned home. It is noteworthy that at the moment when he entered her house, Fuller was talking to Casey on the phone. He did the same thing a month later in December. According to Scott, the girl talked to Dave until she stopped responding to the message. A year after Casey's death, her case began to be examined in courses for police officers and FBI agents, as a shining example of why children should be protected on the internet.